Join our growing YouTube family. Subscribe now and be part of every exciting moment. Ever had a similar encounter or strange moment? We'd be thrilled if you'd share it with us in the comments. Who knows, your story might be featured next. Good evening. Or perhaps, good luck sleeping tonight. You think you know what home is, don't you? A sanctuary, a place of comfort, of safety. But what if the very walls you live within are merely holding back a darkness that was invited in? An ancient, smiling evil waiting for its chance. Tonight I'm going to tell you a story, not just about a toy that moved on its own, but about a sanctuary turned into a prison and the insidious unraveling of a soul. A story from our very own Okara, a tale whispered in hushed tones about the apartment on the old Faisal Road and the uninvited guest that came to stay. Our protagonist was a young artist named Sarah. She had that quiet intensity about her, the kind that lives more in the world of canvas and color than in loud chatter. When her Aunt Martha passed on, Sarah inherited her apartment. A modest place full of quaint, old-world charm, smelling faintly of lavender and forgotten dreams. Aunt Martha, you see, was peculiar. A collector of oddities, a whisperer of folk tales, a woman who saw patterns in tea leaves and portents in the flight of a sparrow. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, had always brushed off her aunt's eccentricities with an affectionate, if slightly amused, shrug. A mistake, perhaps. A very grave mistake. The night the true horror began, the skies above Okara wept, a monsoon storm raged, turning the world outside into a blurred, watery tableau. Rain lashed against Sarah's windows, a relentless drumming that should have been comforting, but instead felt like a prelude. It was late, well past midnight, the kind of hour when the city itself seems to hold its breath. That's when a sharp, almost violent rap echoed through the silent apartment. Not a knock, a demand. Sarah, already unnerved, peered through the peephole. A figure stood, shrouded in a dark rain slicker, holding a large, oddly shaped parcel. Their face was obscured, a blank canvas of shadows. The voice, when it came, was flat, devoid of human warmth, like gravel scraping against bone. "Sarah Jenkins? Package for you? Estate of Hemlock." Her hand trembled as she signed the digital pad, the surface of which felt unnervingly cold. The parcel itself was deceptively heavy, dense, and it carried a peculiar, cloying scent. Not just old wood, but something sweet, sickly sweet, like decaying blossoms and damp, churned earth. A smell that hinted at things long buried. The delivery person simply turned and vanished into the stormy night, their steps oddly silent, as if they had melted into the rain itself. Sarah brought the package inside, setting it on her sturdy wooden coffee table. With fumbling fingers, she cut through the heavy-duty paper. Beneath, an ornate, dark mahogany box was revealed. It was intricately carved with patterns that weren't just floral but seemed to resemble thorny vines, twisting and grasping like skeletal hands. On a tarnished brass plaque, barely legible, were the words, "Bella's Companion, Est, 1888. Bella. The name felt like a cold breath on the back of her neck. With a loud, jarring click that seemed to crack the silence of the room, Sarah unlatched the brass clasp and lifted the lid. Nested in faded, once luxurious crimson silk, now looking like dried blood, lay the porcelain doll. It was a masterpiece of antique craftsmanship, delicate painted features, cheeks unnaturally flushed, and wide, glassy blue eyes that seemed to pierce directly into Sarah's very soul. Its blonde hair, styled in elaborate curls, was tied with a tiny, grotesque lace bow. It wore a pristine, lace-trimmed Victorian dress, pristine despite the passage of centuries. It was beautiful, yes, but its beauty was unsettling, a thin veneer over something deeply wrong. Those eyes seemed to hold an ancient secret, their gaze unwavering, direct, almost knowing. Sarah felt a profound, instinctive repulsion, yet an odd, morbid fascination held her rooted. She lifted it out. It was heavier than it looked, solid, its porcelain skin cold, almost like human flesh after a long night in the cold. It felt rigid, unyielding. She propped it against a stack of art books, forcing herself to believe it was just an old doll, her imagination running wild. She tried to return to her sketching, but her gaze kept drifting back. Those unblinking blue eyes, following her every move, seemed to reflect the dim lamplight in a way that made them appear almost alive. She retired to bed, the doll left alone in the silent living room. The rain continued its relentless drumming, a lullaby to the rising dread. Then, it happened. In the deepest hours, when the city's hum finally dies down, a soft, almost imperceptible click echoed from the living room. It was distinct, not the house settling, not the rain. Then, a deliberate, gentle thud. Sarah bolted upright in bed, heart hammering against her ribs. Every nerve ending sang with a silent alarm. She called out, "Max? Is that you?" Her friend Max often visited, but not tonight. No, she was utterly, terrifyingly alone. She pulled the blanket tight around her, willing the sounds to be a dream, a figment of her overactive imagination. But the silence that followed felt like a palpable presence, a cold breath on her skin, a whisper that wasn't there. Morning brought no comfort. Sarah walked into the living room, a restless night clinging to her like a shroud. Her breath hitched. The doll, which she had so carefully placed against the books, was now sitting upright in the exact middle of the coffee table, facing the window, as if it had been placed there with deliberate precision. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, replacing it, marking its position, her mind desperately trying to rationalize. Sleepwalking? A dream? The old building settling? The denial was a flimsy shield against a dawning, insidious horror. Hours passed. Sarah sat at her easel, trying to lose herself in her art, to anchor herself in the familiar world of creativity. But her eyes kept darting to the doll. It remained still. She almost convinced herself she'd been imagining things, that the stress of her aunt's passing was finally catching up to her. But then, she looked down at her canvas. Unconsciously, her hand had drawn the doll's face, over and over, its unblinking eyes, its serene, unsettling smile. Her hand froze mid-stroke. She looked up, and there it was, the doll's head, which she had meticulously placed facing forward, was now subtly tilted, just a fraction, as if observing her. Not facing the window, but angled towards her, with an unnerving curiosity. A sharp gasp tore from her throat. She sprang up, knocking over her tea, the hot liquid spilling unnoticed across her sketchbook. Her eyes were locked on the doll, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. This was no trick of the light. This was real, and it was watching her. She tried to push the head back, but it felt stiff, almost resistant. A faint, disturbing vibration seemed to hum beneath her fingers, as if a tiny, unseen motor whirred within its porcelain shell. She backed away, clutching her now stained sketchbook to her chest, a useless shield against an invisible growing threat. The doorbell, when it rang, was a jarring intrusion, a sudden, desperate lifeline. Max, her level-headed, pragmatic best friend. He arrived with takeout, a bag of greasy goodness, utterly oblivious to the icy dread that had taken root in her home. Sarah, pale and shaken, tried to explain, her voice a strained whisper. Max, bless his rational heart, laughed gently, thinking she was overtired, grieving. He picked up the doll, examining it with scientific skepticism. No batteries, he chuckled, turning it over. No remote control. He deliberately placed the doll back down, this time facing the wall. It's back to them, a challenge to her moving doll theory. Let's see it turn around now, he said, a reassuring smile on his face, but a faint crease of concern already etched between his brows. They ate, or rather, Max ate while Sarah picked at her food, her eyes glued to the doll's back. Seconds stretched into minutes, nothing. Max sighed, relieved. See, Sarah? Just nerves. But as he looked away, Sarah saw it. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift. The doll's head turned, just a fraction, then another, catching the lamplight. It was now looking at them again, directly. Sarah grabbed Max's arm, her fingers digging into his flesh. Max! It just moved! I swear! Look! Max looked. His smile vanished, his face drained of color. Okay, he whispered. Okay, that's not normal. He stood, slowly, approaching the doll as if it were a sleeping viper. He picked it up, turned it over, examined every seam, every curve of porcelain. He even shook it gently. Nothing. He placed it back, facing the wall, even further back into the shadows of the room. And then, the sound. A faint, almost melodic giggle echoed through the room. It was a child's giggle, but distorted, ancient, as if echoing from a deep well of time. It was playful, yes, but utterly devoid of warmth. A sound that made the hairs on Sarah's arms stand on end. Sarah and Max exchanged a terrified look. Then, Aunt Martha's voice. Closer now, a mischievous whisper, almost in their ears. Some things just need a little attention, dear. And Bella loves company. The voice seemed to emanate not from a specific point, but from the very air around them, surrounding them, trapping them. The doll was no longer on the coffee table. It was sitting upright on the armrest of the couch, directly facing them, its unnervingly calm eyes fixed on them. Its tiny porcelain hands were folded neatly in its lap. Its pristine white dress seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Sarah screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated terror. Max choked, dropping his phone. The doll didn't move. It simply sat there, its painted smile seeming to widen just a fraction in the dim light. You can't be real," Sarah choked out, tears streaming down her face, her voice thin with fear. The ancient giggle filled the room again, louder now, more maniacal, swirling around them, seeming to vibrate in their very bones, resonating with a terrifying joy. And Aunt Martha's voice, colder, more possessive, now a chilling command. "You belong to Bella now, Sarah. You'll keep her company. Forever." Panic, stark and primal, seized Sarah. She lunged for the doll, intending to grab it, to hurl it through the closed window, to shatter it into a million pieces and end the nightmare. Max tried to stop her, yelling her name, but she was a force of pure adrenaline, driven by a desperate need for escape. As her trembling hand reached for the doll's arms suddenly, horrifically, lifted. It moved with a swiftness that was utterly unnatural. Its tiny porcelain hand wrapped around Sarah's wrist, its grip surprisingly strong and icy cold, like a dead thing. Sarah cried out in pain and revulsion, trying to pull away. The doll's grip tightened, its tiny fingers digging into her flesh, radiating a chill that spread through her arm like frozen poison, up to her very heart. The distorted giggle intensified, a triumphant, malicious sound, and in the doll's glassy blue eyes, Sarah saw a flicker of Aunt Martha's face, translucent and terrifying, twisted with malevolent glee. A final, chilling declaration, whispered not just in her mind, but through the doll's unmoving lips, "You are mine, Sarah. Mine." Sarah pulled with all her might, screaming, her voice raw, tearing at her throat. Max, too, desperate, tried to pry the doll's fingers from her, but they were fused, unyielding, like hardened steel. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the kitchen. A heavy ceramic mixing bowl, one of Aunt Martha's prized possessions, had fallen from the counter, shattering on the tile. The sound, for a split second, startled the doll, and its grip loosened just enough. Sarah wrenched her arm free, a livid red mark, almost like a brand, already blooming on her wrist. The momentary distraction had given her a desperate idea. She stumbled backwards into the kitchen, desperately grabbing the industrial-sized container of rock salt she used for cooking and cleansing. Aunt Martha, for all her quirks, had been a firm believer in old wives' tales, in the protective power of salt, purity, warding, banishment. The doll, slowly, deliberately, turned its head, its now black eyes fixed on her. It began to slide off the couch arm, its tiny feet touching the floor. It took a single, wobbly yet purposeful step, then another. The soft, methodical thud of its porcelain feet on the wooden floor was terrifyingly clear, like a predator stalking its prey. Its pace was slow, inexorable, closing the distance. "Stay away from me!" Sarah screamed, a desperate, tearful whisper, almost a prayer. The doll took another step, then another, now almost within arm's reach. Its head tilted, its blank eyes seeming to bore into her very soul, its painted smile stretching unnaturally wide. Sarah ripped open the salt container, scattering a desperate circle around her. Then, with a scream born of pure terror and a desperate primal will to survive, she threw the entire contents of the container at it. A blinding shower of white rock salt exploded over the doll, coating its dress, its hair, its tiny porcelain face, glittering like cursed diamonds. The air shrieked. A high-pitched, agonizing screech tore through the apartment. Unlike anything human or even animal, it was a sound of pure agony and furious ancient rage. A sound that scraped against their eardrums, forcing Max to clap his hands over his ears, tears springing to his eyes. The light in the room seemed to flicker and dim. The doll's delicate porcelain skin began to crack, rapidly. Fine lines like spiderwebs spread across its serene face, contorting it into a horrific, silent grimace of unbearable pain. The glassy blue eyes, still fixed on Sarah, went dull, then dark, then completely black, like shattered glass. The high-pitched screeching faded, replaced by a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very air around the doll, shaking the floorboards, chilling them to the bone. The furniture seemed to creak and groan in sympathy. Then, with a final, sickening pop, the doll's head exploded inward, showering the room with sharp, deadly shards of porcelain. Its body slumped to the floor, disintegrating rapidly into a pile of shattered pieces and fine, almost ethereal dust. The lace dress crumbled, the blonde hair turned to ash. The terrifying, malevolent presence was gone. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Sarah's ragged, sobbing breaths and Max's stunned, relieved gasps. Sarah, covered in salt and dust, trembling violently, collapsed to the floor. Max rushed to her side, pulling her into a tight embrace, both of them shaking uncontrollably, sharing the raw, visceral aftermath of a battle no one would ever believe. They had survived. They had broken the spell. The next morning, the apartment felt sterile, unnaturally clean. Sarah had scrubbed every surface, gathered every last shard of porcelain, every speck of dust, and thrown it all away. She had even burned the original wooden box in a steel bin in the alley, watching the smoke curl into the gray morning sky, praying for purification. She knew with a certainty that reached into her bones that she couldn't stay. She would leave Okara. She would never look back. Max was arranging for her to stay at his place, far away from this house, from this horror. As she sat on the couch, wrapped in a thick, comforting blanket, sipping hot tea, trying to believe it was truly over, her gaze fell upon her sketchbook. It was open to a half-finished drawing of the doll's unnervingly lifelike face. Those blank eyes, that faint, painted smile. She felt a phantom chill on her wrist, a ghostly echo of the doll's grip. And then she saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible drop of what looked like reddish-brown liquid, the color of dried blood, slowly blooming on the doll's painted smile on the paper. As she watched, a tiny, faint line, barely visible, extended from the doll's drawn mouth, forming into a delicate, curved, utterly sinister smile. It looked like the smile of Aunt Martha, but twisted, malignant. Sarah snatched the sketchbook, her hands trembling anew. She ripped the page out, tearing it into tiny, frantic pieces, stuffing them deep into a wastebasket, as if she could erase the memory, destroy the evidence. She then looked at the empty spot where the doll once was. Her gaze slowly, terrifyingly, drifted to her bedroom door. The bright sunlight streaming in no longer felt comforting. It merely illuminated the cold, empty space. A soft, almost inaudible click echoed from her bedroom, just like the first time. Then, the distinctive thud of a tiny porcelain foot gently touching the bedroom floor. Closer this time, so much closer. And finally, a faint, ancient giggle, more confident, more chilling than before, whispered from the room beyond. And it wasn't just a child's giggle. It sounded familiar, more than familiar. It was Aunt Martha's, clear as day. It wasn't just Bella's companion. It was Aunt Martha, and she had come home to Okara to stay. Thank you for joining me for this tale from Okara. May your nights be peaceful and your homes remain sanctuaries. Just be sure to check those quiet corners and listen closely for any unexpected sounds.